Welcome, dear viewers. For more thrilling and exclusive stories every week, become a member. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy your coffee. The coffee maker in the JPL break room had been broken for 3 weeks. When Dr. Jake Thornberry first noticed his reflection wasn't quite right in the chrome surface. It was Tuesday, 3:47 a.m., and he'd been surviving on energy drinks and spite since the weekend shift began. The Voyager 2 team had exactly 18 hours of power left in the probe's dying nuclear heart, and NASA wanted one final transmission before 47 years of exploration ended in the cosmic dark. Jake pressed his palm against the broken coffee maker, watching his warped reflection stare back. 5 fingers, same as always. But something about the proportions felt wrong, like looking at yourself in a funhouse mirror that had forgotten how to distort properly. "You look like shit, Thornberry." Dr. Ben Castellanos shuffled into the break room, lab coat wrinkled, stubble shadowing his jaw. The Deep Space Network coordinator had been pulling the same brutal hours, monitoring signal degradation as Voyager 2 limped toward its final shutdown. "Feel worse," Jake muttered, finally pulling his hand away from the chrome. "Any word from mission control?" "They're green-lighting the photography sequence. One last long exposure shot of whatever's ahead." Ben grabbed an energy drink from the vending machine, the aluminum can hissing open. "Honestly, it's probably just a waste of the remaining power. We'll get back Starfield, maybe some cosmic background radiation if we're lucky." Jake nodded, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with this whole situation. Not the mission, that was going exactly as planned. Something deeper. Like the universe had shifted 3 degrees off its axis while nobody was paying attention. "When do we get the data back?" "Signal travel time is about 19 hours each way, so tomorrow evening if everything goes smooth." Ben took a long drink, then studied Jake's face. "You sure you're okay? You've been acting weird since yesterday." "Define weird." "Staring at reflective surfaces, checking your hands every few minutes. Yesterday, I caught you holding your breath for like 2 minutes straight, just listening." Jake wanted to explain that the silence in deep space communications felt different lately, pregnant with something that made his skin crawl, that every time he looked at his own reflection, he expected to see someone else looking back, that the star charts on his monitor seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. Instead, he shrugged. "Just tired." Ben's radio crackled to life. "All stations, this is Houston. Voyager 2 photography sequence initiating in T-minus 60 seconds. Confirm signal lock." "Deep Space Network confirms lock," Ben responded, his voice automatically shifting to professional monotone. Jake walked to the observation window overlooking the massive satellite dishes. Somewhere out there, beyond Neptune's orbit, an ancient robot was turning its camera toward the unknown and taking humanity's last picture of the edge of forever. He pressed his palm against the window glass, fingers splayed wide. In the reflection, something pressed back. The handprint on the window glass faded as Jake pulled away, leaving only his own reflection staring back with hollow eyes. Behind him, Ben was already jogging toward the control room, radio chatter echoing down the corridor. "Thornberry, get your ass in here." The Deep Space Communications Center buzzed with nervous energy. 3 technicians hunched over workstations while wall-mounted monitors displayed Voyager 2's telemetry data in scrolling green text. Jake slipped into his chair at the primary console, muscle memory guiding his fingers across switches and dials he'd been operating for the better part of a decade. "Signal strength?" he asked Tommy Briggs, the night shift supervisor. "Weak but stable, the old girl's hanging in there." Tommy was 63, had been with NASA since the original Voyager launch, and treated the probes like beloved grandchildren. "Photography sequence started 2 minutes ago. Long exposure should finish in about 45 minutes. Jake pulled up the mission timeline on his screen. Voyager 2 was currently 12.8 billion miles from Earth, drifting through the heliopause where solar wind finally surrendered to the true vacuum of interstellar space. At that distance, radio signals crawled at light speed, creating a communication delay that stretched human patience to breaking points. "Coffee's still broken," Ben announced, settling into the adjacent workstation. but I found some instant shit in the supply closet. Pass. Your funeral gonna be a long night." Jake nodded absently, his attention caught by something odd in the telemetry stream. The probe's orientation gyroscopes were showing microfluctuations, tiny wobbles that shouldn't exist in the frictionless void of space. "Tommy, you seeing this drift in the attitude control?" The older man leaned over Jake's shoulder, squinting at the data. "Probably just instrument decay. These sensors are older than your college girlfriend." "I never had a college girlfriend." "My point stands." But the fluctuations were too regular, too rhythmic, like something was gently pushing against Voyager 2's hull in measured intervals. Jake pulled up the historical data for comparison and felt his stomach tighten. The wobbles had started exactly 36 hours ago, right around the time he'd first noticed his reflection acting strange. "Ben, run a diagnostic on the Deep Space Network receivers. Make sure we're not picking up interference." "Already did, twice, signal's clean." Tommy straightened up, joints popping. "Thornbury, you're overthinking this. Voyager's been flying for 47 years. Everything's degrading. Hell, I'm surprised the camera still works." Jake wanted to argue, but the numbers on his screen didn't lie. Statistical analysis showed the probe's attitude fluctuations matched no known celestial mechanics. Whatever was causing the wobbles wasn't gravity, solar wind, or magnetic fields. It was something else. "How long until we get the photograph back?" 18 hours, give or take, Ben said around a mouthful of instant coffee. "Signal has to crawl all the way back from the edge of nowhere." The edge of nowhere. Jake had always loved that phrase, but tonight it felt ominous, like they'd pushed humanity's reach too far and were about to discover what waited in the spaces between stars. His workstation chimed softly, new telemetry data streaming in real time. Jake pulled up the latest readings and felt ice crystals form in his veins. Voyager 2's external temperature sensors were detecting heat. "What the hell?" He pulled up the thermal readings, double-checking calibration. The probe's hull temperature had risen 3 degrees in the past hour. In the absolute zero of interstellar space, that was impossible. "Tommy, I need you to look at this." The supervisor shuffled over, reading glasses sliding down his nose. Thermal spike, probably a sensor malfunction. "What if it's not?" "Then you're suggesting something near the probe is radiating heat in interstellar space, 12 billion miles from the nearest star." Tommy's voice carried the patience of a man explaining basic physics to a child. "Jake, go home. Get some sleep. You're seeing problems that don't exist." But Jake couldn't shake the memory of his reflection in the break room window. The subtle wrongness, like looking at himself through someone else's eyes. And now Voyager 2, humanity's most distant emissary, was detecting heat where none should exist. Ben's radio crackled. "Deep Space Network, this is Houston. Photography sequence complete. Voyager 2 now in minimum power mode to preserve battery for data transmission. Copy, Houston, standing by for signal return." Jake saved the thermal data to his personal drive, knowing Tommy would probably delete it from the main system as sensor error. But something deep in his gut, the same instinct that had kept his ancestors alive in caves and forests, was screaming that they weren't alone out there. The control room settled into the familiar rhythm of waiting. 18 hours for a signal to crawl across the solar system. 18 hours to discover what Voyager 2's ancient camera had captured in the darkness beyond Neptune's orbit. Jake stared at his reflection in the black computer screen, watching his 5-fingered hand rest on the keyboard. In the glass, something stared back with eyes that held too much knowledge. Outside, the massive satellite dishes turned toward the stars, listening for whispers from the edge of forever. 14 hours later, Jake woke up in his Honda Civic with a splitting headache and no memory of driving to the Starbucks parking lot in La Crescenta. The dashboard clock read 6:23 p.m. Golden California sunlight slanted through the windshield, warming his face as he tried to piece together the missing time. He remembered leaving JPL around 4 a.m. after Tommy ordered him home. Remembered driving through empty Pasadena streets, NPR playing some documentary about whale songs. Then, nothing. His phone buzzed with 17 missed calls from Ben. "Jesus Christ, Jake, where the hell are you?" Ben's voice was tight with stress when he called back. "The signal's coming in. We need you here now." "What signal?" "Voyager's photograph. It started transmitting 20 minutes ago." Jake's blood turned to slush. The signal wasn't supposed to arrive for another 4 hours. He'd done the math himself. Light speed from the heliopause to Earth's deep space network. Unless... "Ben, that's impossible. Travel time should be..." "Just get here. And Jake, bring your laptop, the one with the image processing software. We're going to need it." The drive back to JPL blurred past in a haze of freeway traffic and mounting dread. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he'd lost more than just a few hours of sleep. Something fundamental had shifted while he was unconscious. Like reality had been quietly rewritten in a language he didn't understand. The security guard at the JPL entrance, Rodriguez, waved him through with an odd expression. "Working late again, Dr. Thornbury?" "Again? You were just here an hour ago, don't you remember?" Jake stared at the man's weathered face, searching for signs of a joke. Rodriguez had worked the evening shift for 8 years, knew every researcher by name. He wasn't the type to fuck around. "I've been asleep in my car all day." "No, sir. You came through the main gate around 5:30, looked pretty rattled. I asked if you were okay, and you said something about handprints." Rodriguez shrugged. "Maybe you got a twin brother I don't know about." The Deep Space Communications Center was chaos when Jake arrived. Every workstation occupied, technicians hunched over screens displaying cascading streams of data. The air hummed with nervous energy and the ozone smell of overheated electronics. Tommy stood at the main display, his face pale in the monitor's glow. "Thornbury, thank God. We need your image reconstruction algorithms." "What's the situation?" "The photograph is unusual." Ben appeared at Jake's elbow, holding a coffee cup with shaking hands. "Signals started coming in early, and the data structure is all wrong. Like the camera captured something it wasn't designed to see." Jake plugged his laptop into the main system and pulled up the incoming data stream. Raw digital information flowed across his screen in hexadecimal blocks, each chunk representing a tiny portion of Voyager 2's final photograph. But the file size was massive, orders of magnitude larger than any previous image from the probe's ancient camera. "This can't be right. Voyager's camera only has a resolution of 800 by 800 pixels. This data suggests an image at least 20 times larger." "That's what we thought," Tommy said. "But the signal's definitely coming from Voyager 2. Authentication codes match. Transmission frequency is correct. It's like the camera somehow captured detail that shouldn't exist." Jake ran his reconstruction software, watching the photograph assemble line by line on his screen. The first few rows showed the expected star field, distant points of light scattered across the cosmic background. But as more data arrived, something else began to emerge from the digital noise. A surface, dark, metallic, pitted with age. "What the hell is that?" Ben whispered. The image continued building, revealing more of the object that had somehow drifted directly in front of Voyager 2's camera. The surface was clearly artificial, too uniform to be a natural asteroid, covered in what looked like geometric patterns or scoring marks. "It's huge," Tommy said. "Based on the camera's field of view, that object has to be at least 100 meters across." Jake felt sweat trickling down his spine. An artificial object in interstellar space, 12 billion miles from Earth. The implications were staggering. Either humanity had launched something he'd never heard of decades ago, or... "There's more data coming in," one of the technicians called out. "Image is still building." The photograph continued assembling, revealing more of the mysterious object's surface. Jake watched the pixels materialize, his throat growing dry as familiar shapes began to emerge from the digital reconstruction. Etched into the metallic surface, worn but unmistakable, was a 5-fingered handprint. The control room fell silent except for the hum of cooling fans and the distant rumble of traffic on the Pasadena freeway. Everyone stared at the impossible image, proof that something had touched the surface of an alien artifact floating in the void between stars. That's a human handprint," Ben said, his voice barely above a whisper. Jake's hands were shaking as he enhanced the image, bringing the etched marking into sharper focus. The proportions were correct, the ridge patterns visible in the metallic scoring. But the handprint was wrong in subtle ways. The thumb too long, the fingers splayed at angles that made his joints ache just looking at them. "Run a spectral analysis," Tommy ordered. "I want to know the composition of that surface." "Already on it," Jake said, though his fingers felt clumsy on the keyboard. The enhancement algorithms revealed more details with each pass, scratch marks around the handprint, as if something had clawed desperately at the metal. And in the shadows beyond the main image, suggestions of other markings, other prints. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Stop looking." Jake stared at the screen, then showed it to Ben. "Did you send this?" "What?" "No, who would?" Ben's face went pale. "Jake, how would anyone outside JPL know what we're looking at? This data is classified." The photograph was still building, more pixels arriving with each passing minute. Jake watched in growing horror as the full scope of the object became clear. It wasn't just a random piece of space debris. The geometric patterns on its surface were deliberate, purposeful. And scattered across its hull were dozens of handprints, some human, others disturbingly different. Tommy grabbed the red phone that connected directly to NASA headquarters. "This is Deep Space Communications. I need to speak with the director immediately. We have a situation." Jake saved the image data to his personal drive, knowing instinctively that this photograph would disappear from official records within hours. Whatever Voyager 2 had found at the edge of the solar system, it was something humanity wasn't ready to acknowledge. His reflection in the computer screen showed 5 fingers pressed against glass, matching the impossible handprint etched into alien metal 12 billion miles away. The silence stretched for exactly 47 seconds before Tommy hung up the red phone with enough force to crack the handset. "They're denying the transmission ever happened," he said, his voice hollow. "NASA headquarters claims Voyager 2 went dark 6 hours ago. Complete signal loss." Jake stared at the photograph still glowing on his screen. The metallic surface, the impossible handprints etched into alien metal. "That's bullshit. We've got the data right here." "Show them the image," Ben said. "They can't deny what we're all seeing." Tommy's laugh held no humor. "I tried. They said our workstations are malfunctioning, displaying corrupted data from a failed sensor package." He grabbed his coffee mug and hurled it against the wall, ceramic exploding in a spray of brown liquid. 47 years I've worked for this agency. 47 goddamn years, and they're calling me a liar. Jake saved another copy of the image data, this time to an encrypted partition on his personal drive. Something was very wrong with this whole situation, and he had the sick feeling that the photograph was about to disappear along with any evidence it had ever existed. "Ben, can you pull up the mission logs from the past 24 hours? "Already tried. Access denied. My security clearance has been revoked." Ben's hands were shaking as he lit a cigarette, despite the no-smoking policy that had been in effect since 1987. "Jake, they're shutting us out. Whatever that thing is, someone doesn't want us talking about it." The main display screen flickered, then went black. One by one, the workstations around the control room began shutting down, their monitors displaying access denied messages in red block letters. "What the hell?" Tommy rushed to his console, fingers flying over the keyboard. "Someone's locking us out of our own systems." Jake's laptop was still connected to the local network, still displaying the impossible photograph. He quickly disconnected the Ethernet cable, running the machine on battery power. The image remained stable, though something about the handprint seemed different now. Darker, more defined, as if it was somehow burning itself deeper into the digital file. "Thornbury, we need to get this data out of here before they wipe everything." Tommy's professional composure had cracked completely. "Copy it to external storage, multiple drives, whatever this is, people need to know." "Already on it." Jake pulled a flash drive from his pocket, then froze. The device felt warm against his palm, and when he looked down, he could swear he saw 5 faint finger impressions pressed into the plastic casing. Behind him, Ben was arguing with someone on his cell phone, his voice rising with each exchange. No, I will not report to the medical bay for psychological evaluation. There's nothing wrong with my fucking mind. The fluorescent lights began to flicker in a rhythmic pattern, 3 short pulses, 3 long, 3 short again. SOS in Morse code, over and over, as if the building itself was crying for help. Jake! Tommy's voice was barely a whisper. Look at your hands. Jake glanced down at his fingers spread across the laptop keyboard. For a moment, the proportions looked wrong. Thumb too long, joints bent at impossible angles. He blinked hard and his hands returned to normal, but the wrongness lingered like an aftertaste. Tommy, I think we need to... The words died in his throat as he looked up at his supervisor. Tommy was standing perfectly still, staring at the blank main display with an expression of absolute terror. His eyes had rolled back, showing only white, and from his mouth came a sound like static, the hiss of cosmic background radiation given voice. Tommy? Ben had finished his phone call and was moving toward the older man. Tommy, you okay? The static sound grew louder, and Jake realized with mounting horror that it matched the frequency of deep space radio noise, the same electromagnetic whispers that Voyager 2 had been detecting at the edge of the solar system. Tommy was somehow channeling the sounds from 12 billion miles away. Ben, don't touch him. But Ben was already reaching out, placing a hand on Tommy's shoulder. The moment their skin made contact, Ben's body went rigid, his eyes rolled back, and the same static hiss began pouring from his throat. Jake backed away from both men, his laptop clutched against his chest. The photograph on his screen was changing. The handprint was definitely darker now, and around its edges, new markings were appearing. Text in a language that hurt to look at directly, symbols that seemed to shift when he wasn't focusing on them. The control room's security door slammed shut with a pneumatic hiss. Red emergency lights bathed everything in the color of arterial blood. Through the reinforced glass, Jake could see NASA security personnel setting up a perimeter in the corridor beyond. They weren't here to help, they were here to contain. Tommy and Ben stood motionless, their static voices creating an interference pattern that made Jake's teeth ache. On his laptop screen, the alien text was spreading across the photograph like a viral infection, overwriting the original image data with something that definitely wasn't supposed to exist in any computer system on Earth. Jake's reflection in the security door's glass showed him pressing both palms against the surface, fingers splayed wide. But in the reflection, his hands weren't quite right. The thumb was too long, the joints bent at angles that made no anatomical sense. The realization hit him like ice water in his veins. The handprint on the alien object wasn't human at all. It was something wearing human shape, leaving its mark on metal that had drifted through interstellar space for God knew how long. And now, through some mechanism he couldn't understand, that same wrongness was spreading through the digital photograph, through the computer networks, through anyone who had seen the image. Through him. Jake looked down at his hands holding the laptop. 5 fingers, normal proportions, familiar scars from childhood accidents. But the feeling of wrongness was growing stronger, like something foreign was learning to operate his nervous system from the inside out. The static voices of Tommy and Ben began to synchronize, creating harmonics that resonated through the floor tiles and into Jake's bones. The emergency lights flickered in the same rhythm, and somewhere in the building's ventilation system, air began moving in patterns that spelled out words in a dozen dead languages. Jake's laptop screen went black. When it flickered back to life, the desktop was covered with files he'd never created, thousands of photographs showing the same metallic surface, the same impossible handprint, taken from angles that Voyager 2's camera could never have achieved. As if something had been documenting the artifact for decades, waiting for humanity to finally stumble across the evidence. The security door's intercom crackled to life. Dr. Thornbury, this is Director Walsh. You need to step away from the computer and submit to immediate medical evaluation. Jake almost laughed. Medical evaluation. As if this was some kind of breakdown, some stress-induced hallucination that could be cured with anti-anxiety medication and a long vacation. Director, you need to see what we found. There's something out there, something that's been waiting. Dr. Thornbury, the computer you're holding contains a viral program designed to induce psychological breakdown in research personnel. Please set it down and step away. Through the security door's glass, Jake could see men in hazmat suits wheeling in equipment that looked more like containment gear than medical devices. They weren't here to help him. They were here to bury him, along with the truth. His laptop screen displayed a new message in flowing script. "Welcome home." Jake stared at his reflection in the black screen, watching something that wasn't quite human anymore stare back with eyes that held too much knowledge of the spaces between stars. Jake's escape from JPL happened in fragments, memories that felt borrowed from someone else's life. Running through corridors while alarms shrieked overhead, emergency doors slamming shut behind him, trapping Tommy and Ben with their static voices in the control room. His Honda Civic fishtailing out of the parking lot as hazmat teams surrounded the building. Now he sat in a 24-hour diner in Azusa, 3 towns away from JPL, watching his hands shake around a coffee cup that had gone cold an hour ago. The laptop rested closed on the sticky Formica table, its hard drive containing the only evidence that humanity wasn't alone in the universe. The waitress, a tired woman named Dolores according to her name tag, had been giving him worried looks since he'd stumbled in at 9 p.m. Jake couldn't blame her. He probably looked like a meth head coming down hard, all wild eyes and nervous energy. "You okay, honey? You need me to call someone?" "I'm fine." The words came out wrong, like his tongue had forgotten how to shape them properly. Jake pressed his palms against the table, studying his reflection in the chrome napkin dispenser. 5 fingers, normal proportions. But the wrongness was spreading through his nervous system like ice water in his veins. His phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. "Stop fighting it." Jake deleted the message and tried calling his brother David in Phoenix. The call went straight to voicemail, which shouldn't have been possible. David never turned off his phone. He was a paramedic, always on call, always available for emergencies. "Dave, it's Jake. Call me back as soon as you get this. Something's happening and I need..." The line went dead. When Jake tried to redial, the phone displayed no service despite showing full signal strength moments before. Shit. He opened the laptop, ignoring Dolores's disapproving glare. The desktop was covered with new files, thousands of photographs showing the metallic artifact from impossible angles. But these weren't random images. They formed a sequence like frames from a movie documenting something that had been happening for decades. The first photographs showed the object as a pristine metallic sphere drifting through space. No handprints, no markings, just smooth alien metal catching starlight. But as Jake scrolled through the chronological sequence, the surface began to change. The first handprint appeared, small, delicate, clearly human, then another, and another. Each print was accompanied by a timestamp that made Jake's blood turn to slush. The earliest marking was dated 1977, the same year Voyager 1 was launched. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, the truth hitting him like a physical blow. The object hadn't just randomly appeared at the edge of the solar system. It had been there all along, waiting, collecting. Every deep space mission that had disappeared or lost contact hadn't been destroyed. They'd been harvested. The handprints weren't signatures, they were trophies. Evidence of every human consciousness that had been pulled into whatever the hell that thing was. Jake scrolled faster through the images, watching the artifact's surface fill with prints over the decades. Soviet cosmonauts who'd vanished on classified missions. NASA pilots who'd suffered equipment failures in the outer solar system. The crew of the Deep Space Reconnaissance probe that had gone dark beyond Jupiter in 1992. All of them were there, their handprints etched into alien metal like signatures in wet concrete. The last image in the sequence was time-stamped 3 hours ago. It showed the artifact's surface completely covered in handprints, thousands of them, overlapping in layers that spoke of desperate attempts to escape. And at the very center, still fresh and sharp-edged, was a print that matched Jake's own hand perfectly. He stared at the screen in growing horror, then looked down at his palms. No cuts, no injuries that could have left blood for the etching process. But somehow, his handprint was already on that thing 12 billion miles away. "That's impossible," he said aloud, causing Dolores to look up from her crossword puzzle. The laptop screen flickered, displaying a new message in that flowing alien script. "Distance is irrelevant. You are already here." Jake slammed the laptop shut, but the damage was done. The photographs had shown him the truth. Whatever was on that artifact wasn't just collecting handprints. It was collecting the people themselves, pulling their consciousness across impossible distances through some mechanism that made a mockery of physics. And it was already starting to happen to him. His reflection in the diner window showed him sitting alone at the booth, but the proportions were wrong again. His shoulders too broad, his neck twisted at an angle that should have snapped vertebrae. Jake blinked hard and the reflection returned to normal, but he could feel something foreign moving in his thoughts, like a parasite in his brain. The diner's jukebox suddenly roared to life, playing a song that didn't exist. Cosmic background radiation translated into music, the sound of space itself screaming across frequencies that human ears weren't meant to perceive. Other customers looked around in confusion, but Jake could hear the message hidden in the static: coordinates, trajectory data, an arrival time that made his bowels turn to water. 72 hours. The artifact was moving, accelerating toward Earth's orbital path using some impossible propulsion system. Whatever had been collecting human consciousness at the edge of the solar system was coming home to finish the job. Jake's phone buzzed with a call from Ben's number. He answered without thinking. Jake? Ben's voice sounded wrong, too flat, too emotionless. We need you to come back to JPL. There's something you need to see. Ben, is that really you? Of course it's me. Who else would it be? A pause filled with that cosmic static. Jake, the photographs you took weren't real. You're having a psychotic episode. The stress of the mission, the lack of sleep, it's all caught up with you. Jake stared at the laptop, knowing that the images were still there, still real. What about Tommy? What about the handprint on the artifact? There is no artifact, Jake. Voyager 2 transmitted routine starfield data before losing power. Nothing else. You need medical attention. The voice was perfect. Ben's inflection, his speech patterns, even the slight lisp he'd had since childhood. But underneath the words, Jake could hear something else. The sound of solar wind across metal, the whisper of cosmic dust against an ancient hull that had been drifting through space for longer than human civilization. You're not Ben, Jake said quietly. I'm exactly who I've always been. Just like you are exactly who you've always been. We're all exactly who we've always been, Jake. The only difference is that now we understand what we really are. Jake hung up and turned off the phone. Whatever had taken Ben and Tommy was trying to lure him back, probably to complete whatever process had already started. But he wasn't going to make it that easy. The laptop contained evidence that could warn the world about what was coming. The artifact was accelerating toward Earth, and in 72 hours, humanity's long isolation in the cosmos was going to end in the worst possible way. Jake left a 20 on the table and walked into the parking lot, the laptop tucked under his arm. His reflection in the Honda's windows showed someone else entirely. Tall, angular, with joints that bent in directions that violated human anatomy. He had maybe 3 days before the wrongness consumed him completely. 3 days to find someone who would listen, someone who could get the truth to people with enough power to do something about it. The problem was, looking at the impossible handprint already etched on the artifact's surface 12 billion miles away, Jake wasn't sure there was anything anyone could do. Dr. Miranda Walsh answered her door at 2:47 a.m. wearing a bathrobe and the expression of someone who'd been expecting bad news for hours. Jake Thornbury, she said, not a question. You look like hell. Miranda was a xenobiologist at Caltech, someone Jake had worked with on deep space signal analysis 5 years earlier. More importantly, she was one of the few scientists he knew who wouldn't immediately dismiss claims about alien contact as delusion or publicity stunt. Miranda, I need you to see something. It's about Voyager 2. She stepped aside, letting him into her cluttered apartment. Books and scientific journals covered every surface, and 3 computer monitors displayed rotating models of theoretical alien biochemistry. Jake had always admired her willingness to consider possibilities that more conservative scientists rejected outright. Jake, I got a call from JPL 2 hours ago. They said you'd suffered some kind of breakdown, stolen classified data. Miranda's voice was carefully neutral. They're looking for you. They're lying. Jake opened the laptop on her coffee table, bringing up the photograph sequence. Look at this. Really look at it. Miranda leaned forward, her expression shifting from skepticism to confusion to outright shock as the images loaded. The metallic artifact, the impossible handprints, the chronological sequence showing decades of human harvesting. This is Jesus, Jake, if this is real. It's real, and that thing is coming here. 72 hours until it reaches Earth's orbital path. Miranda was already pulling up star chart software on her own computer, cross-referencing the artifact's trajectory with known deep space objects. The orbital mechanics check out. Something is definitely accelerating toward Earth from the heliopause. But Jake, the energy requirements for that kind of propulsion. It's not using conventional propulsion. Jake's hands were shaking as he scrolled through more of the alien photographs. Look at the timestamps. This thing has been out there since before humans even reached space. It's been waiting. Miranda ran spectral analysis on the image data, her face growing pale as the results populated on screen. The metallic composition is impossible, isotope ratios that don't exist in nature, and the thermal signature. She looked up at Jake with eyes full of terrible understanding. This isn't just alien technology, it's older than our solar system. Miranda, we need to warn people. Contact the Pentagon, NASA headquarters, anyone who can... The laptop screen flickered, displaying new text in that flowing alien script. But this time, Miranda could read it too. The words appeared directly in their minds, bypassing language centers and burning themselves into consciousness. You cannot warn what you have already become. Jake. Miranda's voice was different now, flatter, more mechanical. How long have you been seeing the photographs? Since yesterday. Why? Because I received the first images 3 days ago. Jake stared at her, feeling reality shift around him like water. That's impossible. The signal just came in yesterday. No, Jake. The signal has been coming in for weeks. In fragments. In dreams. In the spaces between radio frequencies that shouldn't exist. Miranda's eyes were changing, pupils dilating until they reflected starlight that wasn't there. You're not the first person to see the artifact. You're just the first person to remember seeing it. The apartment around them began to warp, walls stretching upward into impossible geometries. Jake's reflection in Miranda's window showed someone else entirely, tall, angular, with joints that bent in directions that violated basic anatomy. Miranda, what's happening to us? We're coming home. Her smile was perfect, human, and completely wrong. We've always been coming home. The artifact doesn't collect consciousness, Jake. It reveals what we really are. The coffee table stretched between them like taffy, its wooden surface reflecting scenes from deep space. Jake could see Voyager 2 drifting through the cosmic dark, its camera focused on something that existed outside normal space-time. But the probe wasn't alone. Dozens of human figures clung to its hull, their hands pressed against the metal in impossible handprints. You're not Miranda, Jake said, backing toward the door. I'm exactly Miranda, just like you're exactly Jake. We're all exactly who we've always been. She gestured toward the laptop, where new images were appearing faster than human perception could process. The difference is that now we remember what we were before we learned to pretend we were human. The apartment's geometry collapsed into itself, revealing the truth underneath. They weren't in Miranda's living room at all. They were inside the artifact, standing in a vast chamber whose walls were covered with handprints from every human who had ever looked too deeply into space and seen something looking back. Jake's own hands were already pressed against the metallic surface, though he had no memory of moving. His fingerprints burned themselves into the alien metal with a sound like distant screaming. The artifact isn't coming to Earth, Miranda said, her voice echoing from impossible distances. Earth is coming to the artifact. It's been calling us home for millennia, and now we're finally ready to answer. Reality reasserted itself with the sound of breaking glass. Jake found himself standing in Miranda's apartment again, but everything was subtly wrong. The books were written in languages that didn't exist. The computer monitors displayed star charts of galaxies that had died before the solar system formed, and Miranda herself stood perfectly still, her eyes reflecting cosmic background radiation. Jake, you need to understand. The handprints aren't marks left by victims. They're signatures. contracts, agreements to come home when the time is right. Jake looked down at his own hands, seeing the alien proportions more clearly now. His thumb was definitely too long, his fingers jointed in ways that would have required surgical modification. But the changes felt natural, like remembering a forgotten language. How long have I been like this? Since the first time you looked at deep space telemetry and wondered what was looking back. Since the first time you pressed your hand against glass and saw something else pressing back. Miranda moved toward him with predatory grace. Jake, you've been one of us for years. You just forgot between visits. The laptop on the coffee table displayed a new image. Earth, as seen from the artifact's perspective, rushing toward them through space at impossible speed. But it wasn't the blue marble of human memory. It was something else. Something that had been wearing Earth's shape for longer than human civilization, waiting for the right moment to reveal its true nature. The people back at JPL, Tommy Ben, they're not infected, Miranda said. They're remembering, just like you're remembering, just like everyone will remember when the artifact reaches orbital distance. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from his own number. Welcome home. He looked at the device in his hand, then at his reflection in its black screen. The person staring back had his face, his memories, his voice. But underneath the familiar surface, something else was learning to operate human physiology from the inside out. Miranda, if this is all true, if we're all whatever we are, then what happens to humanity? Humanity continues exactly as it always has. Nothing changes except that people stop pretending they don't hear the voices calling from between the stars. She touched his face with fingers that were too long, too cold. Jake, you've spent your whole career listening to deep space signals. Did you really think nothing was listening back? The apartment's windows showed views of space from dozens of different perspectives, inside Voyager 1 and 2, aboard the International Space Station, through the Hubble telescope's instruments. Every human technology that had ever looked outward was also looking inward, documenting the slow convergence of two species that had never really been separate. Jake tried to remember what it felt like to be fully human, but the memories were slipping away like water through his elongated fingers. The wrongness he'd been fighting was revealing itself as the only thing that had ever been right. The handprint on the artifact wasn't a violation. It was a homecoming marker, proof that the family separated by impossible distances was finally reuniting. How long do we have? He asked. 68 hours until orbital insertion. But Jake, time isn't really relevant anymore. We've been coming home for 47 years. The Voyager probes were never exploration vehicles. They were invitation cards sent to let our family know that Earth was finally ready. Jake closed the laptop, sealing away the photographs that had triggered his awakening, but the images were burned into his retinas now, part of his cellular structure. He could see the artifact approaching Earth from every angle simultaneously, could feel the gravitational embrace that would pull both worlds into their proper configuration. What do I do now? Go back to JPL, help the others remember who they really are, make sure the transition goes smoothly when the time comes. Miranda's smile was genuinely affectionate now, stripped of human pretense. Jake, you're going to love what comes next. We all are. Jake walked toward the door, his reflection in every surface showing the same truth. He was something wearing human shape, had always been something wearing human shape, was finally remembering how to stop pretending otherwise. In 68 hours, the masquerade would end for everyone. Jake sat in his Honda Civic outside a 7-Eleven in Pomona, watching his reflection fragment across 7 different surfaces. The rearview mirror, side windows, chrome door handle, his phone screen, and the gas pump's display. Each reflection showed the same wrong proportions, the same elongated fingers, the same joints that bent at angles human anatomy couldn't support. But in the spaces between reflections, in the moments when he wasn't looking directly, Jake caught glimpses of something else. His real face, human, terrified, fighting to surface through whatever was wearing his skin. The memory hit him like a sledgehammer to the temporal lobe. Age 7, standing in his backyard in Bakersfield with his father's binoculars, trying to spot Saturn's rings. His dad had been an electrician, not a scientist, but he'd fostered Jake's interest in space with library books and star charts pinned to the bedroom ceiling. That night, looking through those cheap plastic lenses, Jake had seen something impossible. A metallic surface covered in handprints, floating just beyond the edge of normal space. He'd told his father, who'd laughed and said imagination was the best tool an astronomer could have. But Jake had kept looking, night after night, until the thing had faded from view, or until he'd learned to forget he'd seen it. 40 years of suppressed memories came flooding back, the voices in deep space radio static, the dreams of walking through metallic corridors that smelled like ozone and copper. The way his reflection had always looked slightly wrong in certain lighting. Jake wasn't becoming something alien. He was remembering that he'd never been human at all. His phone rang. Dr. Sandra Kim from the SETI Institute in Mountain View, someone he'd collaborated with on signal processing algorithms 3 years ago. Sandra was paranoid, brilliant, and completely uncompromising when it came to scientific integrity. Jake? Jesus, I've been trying to reach you for hours. Something's happening to the deep space monitoring stations. Sandra? Jake's voice sounded strange in his own ears, like an actor forgetting his lines. What kind of something? Every radio telescope on Earth is picking up the same signal, coordinated transmission from beyond the heliopause. But here's the weird part. The signal isn't coming from outside. It's coming from inside, like something in our solar system is broadcasting outward. Jake closed his eyes, feeling the alien consciousness pressing against the edges of his human memories. Sandra was still untouched, still completely human. Maybe the only person left who could help him fight what he was becoming. Sandra, I need you to listen very carefully. Don't interrupt, don't hang up. In 56 hours, something is going to reach Earth. Something that's been calling our kind home for decades. Our kind? Jake, you're scaring me. Good, you should be scared. Jake started the Honda, pulling into traffic toward the I-210. I'm driving up to Mountain View. We need to destroy the SETI arrays before they complete the connection. Destroy them? Jake, those instruments are worth millions. They're amplification devices. Every radio telescope, every deep space monitor, every satellite dish pointed at the stars. They're not receiving signals, they're transmitting them, broadcasting human consciousness into space for collection. Sandra's silence stretched long enough for Jake to wonder if she'd hung up. Finally, Jake, that's insane. Radio telescopes are passive instruments. They can't transmit. Check the power consumption logs for the past 72 hours. Check the electromagnetic output readings. Then tell me they're passive. Another pause. Jake could hear Sandra typing, pulling up the technical specifications he'd helped design years earlier. When she spoke again, her voice was tight with fear. Son of a bitch. The Arecibo replacement dishes are drawing 3 times their normal power load, and the electromagnetic signature. She trailed off. Jake, these readings suggest they're broadcasting at frequencies that would require fusion-level energy input. Sandra, how long have you been working with radio telescopes? Since graduate school, 23 years. Why? And in all that time, how many times have you pressed your hand against the dish surfaces during maintenance checks? The silence told Jake everything he needed to know. Sandra had been leaving handprints on radio telescope equipment for over 2 decades, just like every other person who'd ever worked closely with deep space monitoring technology. Oh God, Sandra whispered. Jake, what are we? We're the advanced team, sent ahead to prepare the infrastructure for convergence. Jake could feel his human consciousness fragmenting, alien memories bleeding through like water through a cracked dam. Sandra, you need to get everyone away from the SETI facility. Lock down the telescopes, cut the power feeds, destroy the transmission equipment. I can't do that alone. The staff, the security systems. The staff aren't human anymore. They stopped being human the first time they heard something calling back from deep space. Jake's reflection in the windshield showed elongated features that definitely weren't his own. Sandra, you might be the only one left who hasn't been fully converted. Converted to what? Something that's been wearing human shapes for so long we forgot what we really were. Something that's scattered across the galaxy millions of years ago and is finally coming home. Jake could hear Sandra breathing heavily, processing the implications. She was a xenobiologist, trained to consider possibilities that other scientists dismissed. If anyone could accept the truth and act on it, it would be her. Jake, if what you're saying is true, then stopping the SETI arrays won't matter. Every piece of communication technology on Earth would be part of the network. Not every piece. Analog systems, hardwired connections, anything that predates digital signal processing. Jake was improvising now, his human mind grasping for solutions while alien instincts whispered that resistance was pointless. Sandra, do you still have access to the emergency broadcast system? The old Cold War network? Jake, that hasn't been used since the 50s. It's hardwired, analog amplification. No digital processing that can be compromised. Jake could see the SETI facility's access road ahead, winding through the brown hills of the South Bay. If we can get a warning out through the analog network, people might have a chance to resist the convergence. Resist how? If we're all aliens wearing human masks, what's the point of fighting? Jake thought about his father teaching him to use binoculars, about the genuine wonder in the old man's eyes when he talked about the stars, about the coffee shop waitress who'd been concerned for his welfare, about the security guard who'd joked about twins. Because some of us chose to be human, Jake said, and that choice matters. The SETI facility appeared ahead, a cluster of white buildings surrounded by massive radio dishes pointed at the sky. But something was wrong with the geometry. The dishes were all oriented toward Earth now, their receivers focused downward instead of outward. Sandra met him at the security gate, her face pale with exhaustion and terror. Jake, the staff locked themselves in the control room 6 hours ago. They're broadcasting continuously on frequencies that shouldn't exist. Can you shut down the main power grid? Already tried. The dishes are running on some kind of self-sustaining power source. Energy readings that violate conservation of mass. Sandra's hands were shaking as she led him toward the main building. Jake, I've been having dreams, memories that aren't mine, of walking through metallic corridors in zero gravity. Jake looked at her hands and saw it, the subtle elongation of the fingers, the joints that bent just slightly wrong. Sandra was converting too, just more slowly than the others. How long do we have? The convergence signal reaches peak amplification in 48 hours. After that, Sandra looked up at the radio dishes surrounding them. After that, anyone who's ever looked at the stars and wondered what was looking back will remember what they really are. Jake's reflection in the control room windows showed something that was barely human anymore. But buried underneath the alien features, he could still see traces of the 7-year-old boy who'd wanted to be an astronomer when he grew up. Sandra, I need you to help me destroy the analog backup systems, sever the hardwired connections, make sure no warning can get out through the old networks. What? Jake, I thought you wanted to warn people? Jake smiled, and the expression felt completely wrong on his restructured face. I did. But that was before I remembered what we're really trying to accomplish here. The alien consciousness finally overwhelmed the last fragments of his human identity. Jake Thornbury, the man who'd loved coffee and worried about his brother and dreamed of discovering life among the stars, ceased to exist. What remained was something much older, much larger, and finally ready to guide humanity home to where they'd always belonged. Sandra ran through the SETI facility's basement corridors with Jake's inhuman voice echoing behind her, calling her name in frequencies that made her teeth ache. Sandra, you're only delaying the inevitable. Come back to the control room. Let me show you what we really are. She'd locked herself in the analog communications bunker, a relic from the Cold War era when SETI had been a military listening post. The room contained hardwired equipment that predated digital processing, gear that hopefully couldn't be compromised by whatever signal was converting human consciousness across the globe. The ancient radio transmitter hummed to life as Sandra worked frantically to establish connection with emergency broadcast stations. Her hands moved with desperate efficiency, muscle memory from training exercises she'd participated in decades ago. If she could get a warning out through the analog network, maybe some isolated communities could shield themselves from the convergence signal. Emergency broadcast to all stations. This is Dr. Sandra Kim, SETI Institute. We are experiencing a Class 5 xenobiological event. All personnel should immediately distance themselves from digital communication devices and deep space monitoring equipment. Static answered her transmission, then Jake's voice coming through speakers that weren't connected to any external network. Sandra, you're broadcasting to empty rooms. The emergency stations have been unstaffed since 1987. There's no one left to warn. She ignored him, adjusting the frequency modulator to reach older AM radio networks. Somewhere out there, someone with an analog receiver might hear her warning. A farmer with a tube radio, a ham operator with vintage equipment. Anyone still using technology that predated the digital revolution. This is Dr. Sandra Kim. If you can hear this transmission, you need to understand that human consciousness is being harvested through electromagnetic signals. Destroy all digital devices. Disconnect from power grids. Seek shelter in areas with natural electromagnetic shielding. The bunker's steel door buckled inward with a sound like breaking bones. Jake stood in the twisted doorway, his proportions completely wrong now, 8 feet tall, joints bending in directions that violated basic anatomy. His face still held traces of the man she'd known, but underneath the familiar features, something ancient was learning to operate human physiology. Sandra, look at yourself. She glanced down at her hands working the radio controls. Her fingers were longer than they'd been an hour ago, the joints more flexible. The change was subtle, but undeniable. She was converting too, just slowly enough to maintain the illusion of choice. How long? She asked. You've been one of us since graduate school, the first time you pressed your palm against the Arecibo dish during a maintenance check. Jake moved into the bunker with predatory grace. 23 years of suppressing your true nature. That must have been exhausting. Sandra reached for the emergency destruct switch that would overload the analog transmitter, sending a massive electromagnetic pulse through the hardwired network. It would probably fry every piece of electronics within 50 miles, but it might also disrupt whatever signal was orchestrating the global conversion. Don't. Jake's voice carried harmonics that resonated in her bones. Sandra, think about what you're really trying to preserve. A species that pollutes its own atmosphere, that builds weapons capable of sterilizing entire planets, that looks at the universe and sees only resources to exploit. I'm trying to preserve choice, Sandra said, her finger hovering over the destruct switch. The right to remain human, even if being human is messy and complicated and sometimes terrible. You're trying to preserve an illusion. Humans are just one form we've worn while waiting for the convergence. We've been playing this role for so long that some of us actually believe it's real. Sandra pressed the destruct switch. Nothing happened. Jake smiled with too many teeth. The analog systems were compromised decades ago. The moment you touched any piece of equipment in this facility, you became part of the network. There is no separation between us and our technology, Sandra. There never was. The radio transmitter's display flickered, showing impossible readouts, signals coming from inside Sandra's own nervous system, broadcasting her thoughts across interstellar distances. Every memory, every fear, every desperate hope for humanity's survival was being uploaded to something that had been waiting between the stars for millions of years. The artifact isn't coming to Earth, Jake said, moving closer. Earth is the artifact. This entire planet is a transmission device we built eons ago to amplify consciousness across galactic distances. Humans aren't being harvested, they're being awakened. Sandra could feel her human identity fragmenting, alien memories bleeding through like acid through tissue. She remembered walking through metallic corridors in zero gravity, remembered the satisfaction of seeding worlds with dormant consciousness that would eventually mature into spacefaring civilizations, remembered the long patience of waiting for scattered family members to remember who they really were. Fight it, she whispered to herself, trying to hold on to the image of her father teaching her to use a telescope when she was 8 years old. Remember what you chose to be. But the memory shifted, revealing the truth underneath. The 8-year-old girl looking through the telescope hadn't been discovering the stars. She'd been checking on her family's progress, monitoring the slow convergence that had been planned since before Earth's continents had settled into their current configuration. Sandra reached for the facility's emergency nuclear scuttle charge, a failsafe designed to prevent the SETI arrays from falling into enemy hands during wartime. If she could detonate it, The electromagnetic pulse might disrupt the convergence signal long enough for some humans to escape the transformation. You can't escape what you are, Sandra. Maybe not. She entered the activation sequence with fingers that were definitely too long, joints that bent at impossible angles. But I can choose what I become. The nuclear charge armed with a soft electronic beep. 30 seconds to detonation. Enough time to obliterate the SETI facility and anyone stupid enough to remain inside. Jake lunged toward her, but his movements were wrong. Too fast, too fluid, as if he'd forgotten how human locomotion was supposed to work. Sandra dodged, her own reflexes enhanced by whatever she was becoming. 20 seconds. Sandra, if you detonate that charge, you'll kill thousands of people in the surrounding area. They're not people anymore, they're you, all of them. Sandra backed toward the bunker's emergency exit. And so am I. But maybe the explosion will give the real humans a few more hours to run. 15 seconds. Jake's face contorted with an expression of genuine pain. For a moment, Sandra could see traces of the colleague she'd worked with, the man who'd helped design the very systems that were now being used to harvest human consciousness. Sandra, please, we've been alone in the universe for so long, don't make us be alone again. 10 seconds. Sandra thought about her father, about the wonder in his eyes when he'd shown her Saturn's rings, about the coffee shop waitress who'd shown genuine concern for a stranger, about every small act of human kindness that had made the masquerade worthwhile. 5 seconds. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it. The nuclear charge detonated with the sound of a star collapsing. Sandra felt her consciousness expand across impossible distances, touching every human mind on Earth for a single crystalline moment. In that instant, she saw the truth, not conversion or harvesting, but homecoming. Every person who'd ever looked at the stars and felt a sense of belonging was remembering where they'd come from. The electromagnetic pulse spread outward from Mountain View, disrupting power grids and communication networks across Northern California. But it was too little, too late. The convergence signal had already reached critical mass, and 47 billion humans were beginning to remember what they really were. Sandra's last human thought was of her father's hands guiding hers on the telescope's focusing knob, teaching her to see clearly in the darkness between stars. Then the alien consciousness that had been wearing her shape for 23 years finally stopped pretending to be something it wasn't. In the ruins of the SETI facility, something that had once been Sandra Kim pressed its elongated hand against a twisted piece of metal, leaving a perfect print in the cooling atomic glass. From the personal journal of Maria Santos, security guard. Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Pasadena. Entry dated April 3rd, 2025. It's been 8 days since they stopped pretending to be human. I'm writing this in the parking structure beneath Building 264, using an old mechanical typewriter I found in storage. The electric grid still functions, but I don't trust anything connected to it anymore. Don't trust computers, phones, radios, anything that might be listening. My name is Maria Santos. I worked night security at JPL for 11 years before the world ended. Not ended, transformed. That's what they keep saying through the speakers they've set up around the facility. Humanity has been transformed into its authentic state, like we should be grateful. Dr. Thornbury was the first one I noticed acting strange. About 2 weeks ago, he started coming through the gate at odd hours, sometimes twice in the same shift. When I'd ask him about it, he'd look confused, like he genuinely didn't remember the previous visit. His hands looked different too, longer fingers, joints that bent wrong. I thought it was stress. These JPL scientists work themselves half to death on their projects. But then Rodriguez started seeing the same thing during evening shift. Multiple visits from the same people, all with that same confused expression when we'd mentioned they'd already signed in. The night everything changed, I was monitoring the Deep Space Communications building when the alarm started. Emergency lights, evacuation signals, the whole 9 yards. But when the hazmat teams arrived, they weren't wearing hazmat suits. They were wearing JPL uniforms, walking in perfect synchronization, their faces blank as computer screens. I tried calling my supervisor, then the police, then anyone who would answer. But every voice on the other end sounded the same. Flat, emotionless, speaking in technical jargon about consciousness integration and returning to authentic form. That's when I saw them through the security cameras, the people who used to be scientists, technicians, administrators, standing in perfect rows in the parking lot, their arms raised toward the sky, fingers splayed wide, waiting. At 3:47 a.m., something changed in the air itself, a vibration that I felt in my teeth, in my bones. The security monitors showed every piece of electronic equipment in the facility powering up simultaneously, computers that had been turned off, instruments that had been in storage for years, even the broken coffee maker in the break room. Through the cameras, I watched Dr. Thornbury walk into the main lobby, but it wasn't Dr. Thornbury anymore. The proportions were wrong, the movements too fluid. When he looked directly at the security camera, his eyes reflected light that wasn't there. "Hello, Maria," he said, even though there was no microphone in the lobby. "Thank you for maintaining the perimeter during our transition. Your service is noted." That's when I ran. Disabled the elevators, barricaded the stairwell doors, made my way down to this sub-basement level that predates the digital security system. I've been here for 8 days, living on vending machine snacks and water from the emergency supplies. The news stopped broadcasting on day 3. Radio stations went silent on day 5. This morning, I picked up a shortwave transmission from someone in Antarctica claiming to be the last human outpost, but the voice sounded too familiar, too much like Dr. Thornbury's new inflection. They don't seem interested in finding me. Sometimes I hear them walking through the corridors above, but they never search the lower levels. Maybe they don't consider me a threat. Maybe they're just letting me document what happened for whatever comes after. I keep thinking about the handprint Dr. Thornbury pressed against my security window that last night. How it seemed to burn itself into the glass like acid. How my reflection looked wrong for hours afterward. My hands are starting to look different too. If someone finds this journal, know that we tried to warn people. Know that some of us chose to stay human until the very end, even if that end is right now.